mother gave birth to me while fleeing from cavalry. Affirmative.
Three hired guns cornered the Apache Huntress. The rancher stepped in. "She's with me." The three hired guns never saw the knife. They were too busy laughing, counting ammunition on the counter of Green River's general store, discussing which homesteader they'd burn out next. Too busy spitting tobacco juice on the floor and making jokes about cleaning up the territory for Mr. Carlton. Too busy to notice that the hunched figure in the dusty buckskin dress, standing quietly in the corner, the one they'd dismissed as just another harmless savage woman, had already memorized which of them was left-handed, which had a limp from last night's whiskey, and exactly where each man kept his weapons. Her name was Nita, and she wasn't there to shop. She was there to hunt. The dust storm that swept through Green River that afternoon was the color of dried blood. It was a thick, choking haze that rattled the loose shutters of the storefronts and coated every man's tongue with the taste of iron and grit. It was the kind of storm that made smart people stay indoors, bolting their latches against the wind. But Nita walked through it like she owned the wind itself. She kept her head down as she pushed open the door to Henderson's general store, clutching a worn cloth bag against her hip. To the casual observer, she was just another destitute figure drifting through the frontier, a harmless Indian woman begging for scraps. But the casual observer would be wrong. Her dress, stained with the red dust of the trail, hung heavy past her knees. It wasn't the thin, decorative tweed seen in dime novels. This was buckskin hide, cured so thick and tough, it was essentially armor. It had turned away cactus spines, mesquite thorns, and even the fangs of a diamond-back rattlesnake more times than she could count. On her feet she wore high moccasins, the tops folded down below her knees. The soles were soft, allowing her to feel every vibration in the floorboards. She moved without a sound, a ghost passing through a room of living men. This was her greatest weapon, invisible poverty. Three men stood at the counter, their laughter loud and grating in the quiet store. Nita recognized them instantly. Carlton's enforcers. "Boss says we hit the Harkin place tonight," Jake said, leaning back against the wood, his voice thick with unearned confidence. "Old man's got no help. No neighbors close enough to hear the gunfire. We torch the barn, spook the herd, and he'll sign over those water rights by sunrise." "What about the Indian woman he hired?" asked a younger man, a baby-faced kid they called Mouse. He was fidgeting his hands, unable to stay still. Red, the largest of the three, laughed. It was a cruel, wet sound. "What about her? She's just some broke-down squaw looking for work. Probably can't even speak English. If she gets in the way, she burns with the barn." Nita didn't flinch. She didn't look up, but she understood every syllable. She had learned English from missionaries as a child, long before she had chosen the rifle over the cooking pot, long before she had earned the title of Ibandaji, one who walks the warrior path. She moved along the shelves, feigning interest in a sack of dried beans. Her body was relaxed, but her eyes were moving like lightning, dissecting the room with the cold precision of a predator. Target 1 red. Leaning against the wall. The Winchester rifle next to him has a worn trigger guard. He's careless with his weapon, likely slow on the draw. Target 2 Jake. His gun belt sits low on his left hip. Left-handed. That changes the angle of attack. He's the dangerous one. Target 3 Mouse. The boy keeps touching his coat pocket, not a holster. He's carrying a hideout gun, a Derringer. Unpredictable. Then her eyes flicked to the counter. A map. It was unrolled, anchored by a bottle of whiskey. It showed Abel Harkin's ranch, along with 3 other properties marked with heavy black X's. Intel acquired. Every detail was filed away in her mind, etched into memory like carvings in stone. She was reaching for a bag of cornmeal when a shadow fell over her. Red stepped in front of her, blocking her path to the door. The smell of him hit her first stale whiskey rotting teeth and weeks of unwashed sweat. "Well, well. What do we have here?" Red grinned, looking back at his companions for approval. "Boys, I think this little lady might be lost." Nita stopped. She kept her eyes on the floorboards, her posture submissive, shoulders slumped. But beneath the heavy buckskin dress, her body had undergone a terrifying transformation. Her breathing slowed. Her weight shifted imperceptibly to the balls of her feet. Her right hand drifted casual as a breeze, until it hovered inches from the long bone-handled knife sheathed at her hip. She wasn't scared. She was doing geometry. Throat, gut, kidney. 3 strikes. 3 seconds. Jake sauntered over, circling her like a coyote circling a fawn. "You speak American, sweetheart, or are you just another dumb bang?" The front door slammed open, hitting the wall with a violence that made the dust jump from the floorboards. Abel Harkins stood in the doorway. He looked like a piece of the landscape, weathered, gray and unyielding. But his eyes weren't on the hired guns. They were fixed on Nita's right hand. He saw the tension in her forearm, the subtle coil of her muscles. He realized with a jolt of cold clarity that he hadn't walked in on a bullying session. He had walked in on an execution. "Gentlemen," Abel said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension. "I believe you're blocking the lady's way." Red turned sneering, his hand drifting toward his gun belt. "The lady, hearken, you gone soft in the head? This is just some I know exactly who she is," Abel interrupted, stepping into the room. He positioned himself deliberately between Nita and the gunmen. Not to shield her, she realized. To save them. "See, boys, you look at her and you see rags," Abel said, his tone conversational but laced with steel. "But I recognize those high moccasins. The way the toes are turned up to protect against rocks, the reinforced sides, that's not fashion. That's Apache scout gear." He gestured to her dress. "And that buckskin, that's not a dress. That's armor, thick enough to stop a knife. Expensive enough to cost more than your monthly wages." Abel looked directly at Jake, the smart one. "So unless you want to explain to Mr. Carlton how you lost 3 men in a general store to a woman you called harmless, I suggest you let her finish her shopping." For a long, suffocating moment, nobody moved. The wind howled outside, rattling the glass. Jake looked at Abel, then at the stillness of the woman standing behind him. He saw the lack of fear in her posture. He did the math. "We got no quarrel with you," Harkin Jake muttered. "Yet." He signaled to the others. Red laughed, a nervous hollow sound this time, and grabbed the ammunition boxes. They backed out of the store, casting wary, confused glances at Nita as they pushed through the door into the storm. When the latch clicked shut, the silence in the store was deafening. Abel let out a long breath and turned to face her. "You were planning to kill them?" It wasn't a question. Nita finally looked up. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly devoid of panic. "Not here," she replied. Her English was perfect, unaccented, and sharp as cut glass. "Too many witnesses. And blood is very hard to clean from wooden floors." Abel blinked, taken aback. He rubbed his bearded chin, a small incredulous smile tugging at his lips. "You understood everything they said?" "Every word she said, picking up her cornmeal, as if nothing had happened, including the part about burning your barn tonight to force you to sign the water rights." Abel's smile faded. The gravity of the situation settled back onto his shoulders. "Then I suppose we have things to discuss. Can you ride?" Nita paused. She looked at the old rancher, seeing the exhaustion in his face, but also the unexpected decency. "Mr. Harkin," she said, her voice dropping to a low, proud register, "I was riding before I could walk. My mother gave birth to me in a mesquite thicket while being chased by the U.S. cavalry. She cut the cord, wrapped me on her back, and rode 20 miles that same afternoon to rejoin her people. She walked to the counter, placing a coin next to the whiskey bottle. She met his gaze, her expression hardening into something fierce. "A little midnight ride," she said softly. "That is nothing." Abel's ranch sat in a valley that had once been green. Now it was dying. Carlton, the land baron who owned half the territory, had dammed the main creek upstream. Without water, Abel's cattle were dropping like flies. Another week, maybe 2, and he'd have no choice but to sell for pennies on the dollar, or watch everything he'd built turn to dust. "I can fight men," Abel said as they rode toward his property. "But I can't fight thirst." Nita said nothing. Her eyes scanned the landscape, not like a rancher looking at dying grass, but like a hunter reading tracks. She noticed the flight path of honeybees, the faint green tinge in a wash that should have been bone dry, the way certain desert plants grew taller in one area than another. When they reached the ranch, she dismounted and knelt, pressing her palm flat against the earth. "You have water," she said simply. Abel stared. "Lady, I've lived here 15 years. If there was water, I'd know you have water," she repeated, standing. "You just don't know how to look for it. White men think water only exists where they can see it in rivers and streams. We know better." She pointed toward a rocky outcropping to the north. "There. Underground spring. Maybe 50 feet below that formation. That's 2 miles through cactus and rattlesnake country." Nita was already walking toward the barn. "Then we should start before dark." The terrain between the ranch and the rock formation was brutal, a nightmare maze of jumping calabarrel cactus and stones sharp enough to slice through boot leather. But Nita moved through it like water flowing downhill, her thick buckskin dress and high moccasins turning away every spine and thorn. Abel, following behind, struggled to keep pace. "How do you know there's water there? Bees fly in straight lines toward water in the morning," she explained without breaking stride. "And see those cottonwood roots?" She pointed to gnarled wood protruding from a cliff face. "They only grow that far if they're reaching toward moisture. The earth tells stories. You just have to listen." It took them 3 hours to reach the formation. Another hour of Nita climbing barefoot up the rock face, testing crevices, pressing her ear against stone. Finally, she stopped at a narrow crack halfway up the cliff. "Here." "How can you?" She cupped her hands around the opening and whistled a high, piercing note. A moment later, an echo returned, but different. Hollow. The sound of air moving through an open chamber. "There's a cave behind this rock," she said. "And where there are caves in limestone, there is water." By midnight, they'd widened the crack enough to squeeze through. Abel's lantern revealed a small cavern, and in its center, a pool of clear water bubbling up from deep in the earth. "My God," Abel whispered. "There must be 1,000 gallons here." "More." Nita knelt and tasted it. Sweet water. Not alkali. "We can channel it down to your ranch." "We?" She looked at him steadily. "Carlton's men are coming tonight. I heard them say so. You need a scout. I need a place to resupply before I head north to find my people. This is a fair trade." Abel studied her, this woman who'd found water where he'd seen only death, who'd walked through Hell's Garden without a scratch, who spoke of channeling springs as casually as if she were discussing the weather. "What's your real name?" he asked. "Not just Nita." "Nita," she said quietly. "My brother was a chief. I was his right hand, his eyes and ears. When he died at Tres Castillos, I kept fighting. I keep fighting. Then we have work to do, Nita." For the next 2 days, they worked without rest. Nita showed Abel how to use leather hoses and carved channels to guide water from the spring. She identified edible plants' roots and seeds that could sustain them. She never slept more than 2 hours at a time, and when she did sleep, she did so, sitting up her rifle across her lap. On the second night, As Abel collapsed exhausted, he asked, "Don't you ever get tired?" Nita looked at him with something that might have been amusement. "Mister, Harkin Apache women don't know tired. My mother, when the cavalry came, was 9 months pregnant. She went into labor while riding at full gallop. She delivered me behind a mesquite bush, cut the cord with her knife, wrapped me in her dress, and rode through the night with me strapped to her back. By sunrise, she'd rejoined our band." She paused. "What you're asking me to do, fix a ranch, fight some hired guns? This is easy. This is rest." Abel shook his head in wonder. "Remind me never to make you angry." "Too late," she said, standing suddenly. The wind changed direction. "They're coming." Abel felt it too now that she'd mentioned it. A tension in the air like the moment before lightning strikes. The horses in the corral were stamping nervously, tossing their heads, their ears flat against their skulls. The unnatural silence of night birds made the darkness feel thick and oppressive. "How many?" he asked, checking his rifle with hands that wanted to shake. Nita didn't answer immediately. She walked out into the open yard, away from the house, away from the lamplight. The moon was a thin crescent, barely enough light to see by what the Apache called a knife moon. She stood perfectly still for a moment, her buckskin dress hanging motionless in the dead air. Then slowly, deliberately, she raised both arms to shoulder-height, palms facing outward like she was pushing against invisible walls. She closed her eyes and began to turn in a slow circle, her movements precise and ritualistic. "What are you?" Abel started. "Quiet." The single word cut through the night like a blade. Abel's mouth snapped shut. Nita continued rotating, her breathing deep and even measured like a heartbeat. Her head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. Abel watched, fascinated and slightly unnerved. Was this some kind of prayer, a ritual, or was he witnessing something that defied every rational explanation he'd ever relied on? The silence stretched. 30 seconds. A minute. The only sound was the nervous shuffling of horses and Abel's own pulse thundering in his ears. Then Nita's hands stopped pointing northeast, toward Black Canyon. Her fingers were rigid, trembling slightly. Her eyes snapped open, and even in the dim moonlight, Abel could see they were different, wider, more focused, like a hunting cat that had just spotted prey. 12 men, she said, her voice absolutely certain. 3 miles away, maybe less. They're coming through the canyon pass. Abel stared at her outstretched arms, still pointed unerringly toward the northeast. "How can you possibly know that?" Nita lowered her arms, slowly flexing her fingers as if they'd gone stiff. "My hands grow hot when they face danger," she said simply, "like holding them too close to a fire. The heat tells me direction. The intensity tells me distance. It's a gift. My brother Victorio had it too. He used it to find cavalry patrols in the desert, when there were no tracks, no dust clouds, nothing but feeling." She looked at her palms in the moonlight, and Abel could swear he saw them flushed red, though that might have been his imagination. "When I was 12, soldiers came to our camp at night. I woke up with my hands burning. I warned our people. We escaped before the first shot was fired. My mother said I was touched by the spirits. The missionaries said it was witchcraft. I don't care what they call it. I only know it's never been wrong." Abel wanted to call it superstition. Every rational bone in his body screamed that people couldn't sense danger through their hands like some kind of human compass. But he'd seen Nita find water where there was none. He'd watched her move through terrain that would have killed him. He'd learned painfully that the frontier had rules he didn't understand. And right now, looking at her face, calm, certain, utterly without doubt, he knew she believed every word. "Let's say I believe you," he said carefully. "How do we defend against 12 armed men, even with your gift? We're outnumbered 6-1. "We don't defend," Nita said, already moving toward the barn with that purposeful stride that brooked no argument. "Defending is waiting to die. We hunt them instead. Hunt them, Abel hurried after her. There's only two of us. She stopped so abruptly he nearly collided with her. When she turned, her face was hard in the moonlight, not angry, but carved from something harder than the desert stone itself. Mr. Harkin, do you know how many cavalry soldiers my people killed at Apache Pass in 1862? Abel shook his head. Over 100. Bluecoats came with cannons and horses and confidence. They thought they'd march through our land like they owned it. Her voice was low and tense. Do you know how many warriors we lost? 5. 5 Apache against more than 100 soldiers. That's not possible, it happened. And do you know why? She didn't wait for an answer. Because we didn't fight where they wanted us to fight. We didn't line up in the open and trade volleys like fools. We chose the ground. We made them come to us up rocky slopes, where their horses couldn't climb through narrow passes, where their numbers meant nothing. We attacked when the sun was in their eyes, and they couldn't see us. We made sure every advantage, every stone, every shadow, every ray of light belonged to us. She grabbed a saddle from the barn wall with one hand, hefting it like it weighed nothing. The White Army fights with rules. They form lines. They blow bugles. They expect the enemy to face them honorably. We fight to survive. We fight to win. There's no honor in being dead, Mr. Harkin. Abel felt something shift in his chest, a kind of understanding that went deeper than words. This wasn't just about tonight. This was about a people who'd been fighting impossible odds for generations and somehow impossibly were still fighting. In open ground, you're a rat in a trap. Nita continued, throwing the saddle onto her paint mare with practiced efficiency. 12 men in the open, they surround you. They burn you out. You die. But out there, she gestured toward the dark hills beyond his ranch, where jagged ridges cut black silhouettes against the star-strewn sky. Out there, the land is on our side. Out there, I can make you a wolf. She began cinching the saddle with quick, sure movements. Now, saddle up. We have traps to set, and we have maybe 2 hours before they arrive. How long does it take to set a trap for 12 men? Abel asked, reaching for his own saddle. Nita smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just spotted prey stumbling toward its den. A good trap, about 10 minutes. The rest of the time is just waiting for them to walk into it. Black Canyon was a narrow defile between 2 rocky ridges, the only direct route from Carlton's holdings to Abel's ranch, unless a rider wanted to add 15 miles through country so rough it would kill horses. Nita had scouted it the day before, and she'd known even then that if Carlton came, he'd come this way. Men like him were predictable. They took the easy path. They assumed their numbers made them invincible. Now in the pre-dawn darkness, she moved through the canyon like a shadow, Abel, struggling to keep up behind her. She was reading the terrain the way he might read a newspaper, seeing things he couldn't see, understanding a language written in stone and sand and starlight. Here, she said, finally positioning Abel behind a large rock formation at the canyon's southern end, the narrow part of what Abel now understood was an L-shaped ambush. This is your position. When they come through, let them get 50 yards past you. Then fire twice, aim for horses if you can, and immediately duck down and move 10 feet to your left. Why move? Because they'll shoot where the muzzle flash came from. You won't be there. Then you fire again from the new position. 2 shots. Move right this time 15 feet. Fire again. Make them think there are 3 of you here. Make them confused. Confusion kills more men than bullets. She checked his ammunition, counting rounds like a battlefield surgeon, counting instruments. Don't waste shots. Don't shoot unless you have a clear target. And for God's sake, don't stand up to see if you hit anything. That's how white soldiers die. Where will you be? She pointed up to the eastern ridge, a steep slope of broken rock and scrub brush. There. I'm climbing up now. When the sun rises, and it will rise exactly when they're in the middle of this canyon, it will be at my back. They'll be shooting blind into the light. I'll see them like they're standing on a stage. That's a hell of a climb in the dark. I've climbed worse. She checked her Winchester, her movements efficient and practiced. Remember, don't shoot the men first. Then what? Shoot the horses. Always the horses. Her voice was absolutely serious. A cavalryman on a horse is mobile, dangerous, can escape. A cavalryman on foot is just a soldier. A soldier in the desert without a horse is a dead man. Even if you never fire another shot, the sun will kill him for you. She paused, her hand on his shoulder for just a moment. This will work, Abel. Hearken. Trust the land. Trust the light. Trust that men with rifles are still just men, and men make mistakes when they're afraid. Then she vanished into the darkness, her high moccasins making no sound on the stone, her buckskin dress blending into the pre-dawn shadows, until Abel couldn't tell where the woman ended and the desert began. He settled behind his rock, his rifle heavy in his hands, and waited. The minutes crawled by. His heart hammered so hard he was sure it would give away his position. Every sound made him jump: the skitter of a lizard, the distant cry of a coyote, the wind whispering through sage. Then he heard it. Distant at first, but growing steadily closer, the sound of hoofbeats, the jingle of tack and spurs, the low murmur of men's voices confident in their numbers. Carleton's men were coming. Abel pressed himself flatter behind the rock, his finger finding the trigger. Somewhere above him, invisible in the darkness, Nita was waiting like a coiled spring. The trap was set. Now came the part where men learned that numbers didn't matter half as much as knowing the land. The waiting was the hardest part for a white man, but for Nita it was simply another way of breathing. She had been in position for over an hour, melded into the high ridge of the Black Canyon, like a fossil embedded in the rock. She had prepared with the ritualistic precision of her ancestors. The dry red mud of the riverbed coated her face and arms, masking the shine of her skin. Sprigs of sagebrush and gray desert scrub were tucked into her heavy buckskin tunic and braided into her hair. From 10 feet away, she was a woman. From 50 feet, she was a shadow. From the canyon floor below, she was nothing but the mountain itself. The air was thin and cold, the pre-dawn chill biting through leather, but Nita did not shiver. A shiver was movement, and movement was death. Her Winchester rifle rested on a flat stone, the barrel wrapped in a rag to prevent the morning light from glinting off the steel. She checked the sun's position one last time. It was still hiding behind the eastern ridge, a bruised purple line on the horizon, threatening to bleed into gold. She had timed this down to the heartbeat. The Apache did not fight fair, they fought to win. And today the sun was her second weapon. The sound came first. The clatter of iron horseshoes on stone, the jingle of spurs, the low murmur of men who felt too safe. Carleton's column rode into the canyon throat with the arrogance of kings. There were 12 of them. Carleton rode point, his clean black coat, a stark contrast to the dust-choked air. Flanking him were his lieutenants Jake and Red men, who wore their cruelty like a badge of honor. Behind them trailed 9 hired guns, mercenaries paid in whiskey and coin to burn a ranch they didn't own. Nita watched them through the iron sights of her rifle. She could see them laughing. One man lit a cigarette, the flare of the match bright in the dim light. They were loud, sloppy, and dangerously confident. They were hunting an old rancher and a harmless Indian girl. They expected a rabbit hunt. They didn't know they had just walked into a mountain lion's den. The canyon walls narrowed, squeezing the trail until they were forced to ride 2 by 2. This was the bottleneck. The kill zone. Carleton raised a gloved hand. "Hold!" Up he barked, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Check the map, Jake." "How far to the creek?" Nita's finger tightened on the trigger. "Not yet." The trap had to be airtight. She waited for the sky to answer her. And then it happened. The sun broke over the eastern ridge behind her. It wasn't a gentle sunrise. It was a violent explosion of light. A blinding lance of gold struck the canyon floor, illuminating the riders while casting Nita's position into a silhouette of blazing fire. Now, Nita didn't aim for a man. Men could duck. Men could ride. A crippled column could do neither. Crack. The Winchester roared, the sound shattering the morning stillness like a thunderclap trapped in a bottle. The bullet didn't hit Carlton. It slammed into the skull of the horse directly behind him, Jake's mount. The beast dropped instantly dead before it hit the ground, its massive body creating a wall of flesh and bone in the middle of the narrow trail. Chaos erupted. Horses reared screaming in terror. Men shouted, reaching for weapons that weren't ready. Crack! Nita's second shot was a masterpiece of cruelty and tactics. She took out the rearmost horse. The animal collapsed, kicking wildly, sealing the exit. The column was paralyzed. Blocked in the front. Blocked in the rear. Walls on both sides. Ambush, Jake screamed, scrambling out from under his dead horse. Get to cover, get to, but there was no cover. There was only the kill zone. Up there on the ridge, Red yelled, pointing his Colt toward the eastern rim. The mercenaries opened fire, a ragged volley of lead buzzing toward Nita's position. But they were fighting a ghost. The sun was blazing directly into their eyes. Every time they looked up, they were blinded by the searing light. To them, Nita was just a black void in the center of a burning star. They were shooting at sunbeams. Then the second jaw of the trap snapped shut. From the southern end of the canyon, concealed behind a cluster of boulders, Abel Harkin opened fire. Bang, bang. Pause. Bang. He followed Nita's instructions perfectly. Move. Fire. Move again. To the panicked men below, the echoing shots didn't sound like one old rancher. It sounded like a squad. We're surrounded, a mercenary cried out, his voice cracking. There's a whole damn army up there. Nita cycled the lever of her rifle, the brass casing pinging softly against the rock. She wasn't firing wildly. She was performing surgery. She scanned the chaotic mass below. She looked for the leaders. She looked for the men who were trying to organize a defense. She saw a sergeant barking orders, trying to rally the men into a defensive line. She exhaled slowly. The rifle kicked. The sergeant spun around, clutching a shattered shoulder, his command ending in a scream of pain. She saw another man, calm amidst the panic, raising a carbine to aim at Abel's position. Nita shifted her aim. She put a bullet into the rock inches from his face. Rock splinters sprayed his eyes. He dropped the gun and dove behind a dead horse, his will to fight evaporating instantly. She was dissecting them. She stripped away their leadership, their courage, and their cohesion. Carlton was screaming, his face purple with rage and fear. Shoot them, you cowards, shoot back. But his men were firing blindly into the sky, wasting ammunition, hitting nothing but granite and empty air. The canyon was filled with the smell of black powder and the sharp tang of fear. Nita shifted her position, sliding 15 feet to the left, through the brush, silent as a snake. The mud on her skin matched the earth perfectly. She reloaded, sliding fresh cartridges into the loading gate. Below, the firing had tapped out. The click-click of empty chambers echoed. The mercenaries were cowering behind the horse carcasses, pressing themselves into the dirt, waiting to die. Carlton stood alone in the center of the trail. His horse had bolted. He held a pistol, turning in circles, looking for a target that refused to exist. He looked small now. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the trembling realization that his money couldn't stop a bullet. Nita settled the sights on him. She could end it. One squeeze, and the land baron was history. But death was too easy. She needed to break his legend. She aimed 6 inches above his head. Whiz crack. The bullet tore through the crown of Carlton's expensive felt hat. The hat spun off his head as if slapped by an invisible hand landing in the dust. Carlton froze. He stood statue still, the wind ruffling his hair, realizing that the breath he just took should have been his last. The canyon went silent. Even the horses seemed to hold their breath. Then Nita spoke. She didn't shout. She pitched her voice to carry, using the canyon's acoustics like a natural amplifier. Her tone was flat, devoid of emotion, the voice of the landscape itself. "Drop your weapons." The echo picked it up, rolling it down the canyon walls. Weapons. 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 Or the next bullet, Nita continued, goes through Carlton's left eye. Left eye. Left eye. Left eye. The specificity of the threat hung in the air, terrifying in its intimacy. It wasn't a vague threat of death. It was a promise of surgical removal. Carlton stood trembling, staring up at the blinding sun, his chest heaving. He looked at his men. They were beaten, bleeding, blinded, and terrified of the invisible demon on the ridge. "Do it," Jake hissed from the ground. "Drop 'em. She ain't missing." A rifle clattered to the stones. Then a pistol. Then another. One by one, the sound of steel hitting rock signaled the end of Carlton's reign. The kill zone had done its work. The predators had become the prey, and the Apache scout had turned the canyon into a cathedral of their defeat. When the sun was fully up, Nita descended from the ridge like a ghost becoming solid. Carlton's men stared at her with a mixture of fear and disbelief. This woman in the heavy buckskin dress, her high moccasins dusty from the rocks, had just destroyed them without breaking a sweat. Red, the one who'd called her a harmless squaw, looked like he might vomit. Carlton sat on the ground, his hands tied, his face ashen. You can't get away with this." "Get away with what?" Nita asked calmly. "Defending Mr. Harkin's legal property from armed trespassers. I think the sheriff will be very interested in that map I saw in the general store, the one showing all the ranches you plan to steal." She turned to Abel. "Send for the law. These men can wait here. They're not going anywhere." By noon, the sheriff had arrived with deputies. Carlton's men, thoroughly broken, told everything about the land schemes, the illegal dams, the intimidation. Carlton himself said nothing, but his eyes never left Nita, as if he still couldn't quite believe she was real. When the prisoners were finally loaded into wagons and driven away, Abel stood with Nita at the edge of his property. The new water channel was working perfectly. His cattle were already drinking from the fresh flow. "Stay," he said quietly. "Not as hired help. As a partner. This land is big enough for both of us." Nita was silent for a long moment, looking toward the northern mountains. Then she raised her right hand slowly, palm out, as if testing the wind. "My hand grows warm," she said softly. "There are others out there. My people. Some are lost. Some are hiding. Some are still being hunted." She turned to him. "Thank you, Abel Harkin. You treated me with respect when others saw only a target or a joke. But my war isn't finished. It won't be finished as long as there are Apache children sleeping cold because white men decided their land was worth more than their lives." "You can't fight the whole army," Abel protested. "No," she agreed. "But I can be their eyes, their ears. I can find them water when they're dying of thirst. I can lead them through passes where cavalry can't follow. I can teach them to survive." She walked to her horse, the hardy paint mare that had carried her through 100 miles of desert, and swung into the saddle with effortless grace. "If you ever need water found or enemies seen in the dark or impossible things done," she said, "leave a white stone on top of Eagle Rock. I'll know." Abel nodded, understanding this was goodbye. "What should I tell people when they ask who saved me?" Nita smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Tell them the truth. Tell them it was Nita's sister, a victorious scout of the Apache. Tell them I'm still out here. Tell them we're still fighting." She touched her heels to the horse's flanks. "And tell them we don't forget. As she rode north into the wilderness, the morning sun caught her buckskin dress and turned it golden. The high moccasins, the long knife, the Winchester, all tools of survival, all symbols of a people who refused to vanish. Abel watched until she was just a speck on the horizon, then finally invisible, a ghost again moving through a land that was hers long before it had belonged to anyone else. In the general store 2 weeks later, Mouse, the young gunfighter who'd survived Black Canyon, sat nursing a whiskey. Someone asked him what had happened to Carlton's operation. "We got beat," he said quietly. "Beat bad. By an old rancher? No.